Hello, today's lecture is going to be on the GI system, or more commonly known as the digestive system. At the top, you see that there is an assignment due by next week. Below, in the diagram, we will go ahead and label each numbered line. Number 1 is the esophagus. Number 2 is the stomach. Number 3 is the duodenum. Number 4 is the liver. Number 5 is the gallbladder. Number 6 is the pancreas. Number 7 is the jejunum. Number 8 is the ileum. Number 9 is the cecum. Number 10 is the appendix. Number 11 is the ascending colon. Number 12 is the transverse colon. Number 13 is the descending colon. Number 14 is the sigmoid colon. And number 15 is the rectum. And number 16 is the anus. The GI system, or gastrointestinal system, has multiple functions. Number 1, digestion. There are two forms: mechanical, which involves mastication, which is chewing, deglutition, which is swallowing, and peristalsis, which is the rhythmic involuntary contraction or motility of the GI system. This rhythmic contraction is due in part by acetylcholine, which is a neurotransmitter, and stimulates smooth muscle contraction. The term below, cholinergic, refers to acetylcholine. The second form of digestion refers to chemical digestion. This involves enzymes. The first enzyme, amylase, digests carbohydrates and is released by the pancreas. Pepsin is released by the stomach and digests proteins. Lipases digest fats and is released by the pancreas, and proteases digest proteins and is released by the pancreas. This second function of the GI system involves absorption. We absorb nutrients such as glucose, amino acids, triglycerides, or fatty acids. Next, we absorb water. We receive our water from different sources, such as what we drink, what we eat, and our secretions from our body. Lastly, we absorb drugs, and this is dependent on the route of administration. PO stands for by mouth, and we absorb our medication by the stomach, small intestine, or colon. SL stands for sublingual, and this is absorbed underneath the tongue. Buccal stands for cheek. You dissolve the tablet in between the cheek and the gum. PR stands for per rectum. This means that any drug inserted rectally is absorbed in the rectum. This image illustrates how much fluid is secreted by a normal person on a daily basis. Note: as listed below, you will see that most of the liquid that we secrete is reabsorbed, and only 100 milliliters of water and electrolytes are lost in the feces. The last function is elimination, or excretion of waste. Solid waste, which is insoluble fiber, is eliminated in our stool or feces. BM is an abbreviation for bowel movement, or the movement of our stool or feces out of the body. We also eliminate our water through our urine, and we do also eliminate drugs through our feces and urine. Now we will discuss the individual parts of the GI system. First is the mouth. Our root words here are oro and stomato. We see the PO again, which means per os, or by mouth. We see lips, the root word for that is chylo. We see teeth, which is dento. We see mastication again, which is chewing. Gums is gingivo. We see buccal again, which is for cheek. Tongue, or glosso or lingua. We see SL again, which is sublingual or under the tongue, and we see palate or palato. This image depicts the location of our salivary glands. Saliva helps lubricate the amount of food in our mouth so that it can proceed through the rest of the GI tract. This image depicts The cross-section of our mouth, it helps show the term here, deglutition or swallowing, and the parts of the mouth that are involved in swallowing. The next part of the GI tract is the esophagus. Our root term is esophago. This is a smooth muscle tube and conducts peristalsis, or that involuntary contraction. This is parallel to our trachea, which is our windpipe, which leads to the lungs. The esophagus carries the food down from the mouth to the stomach, crossing the lower esophageal sphincter, or LSE. The LSE is a circular band of muscle which controls the flow of food into the stomach. Next is the stomach. Our root term is gastro. The stomach begins at the end of the lower esophageal sphincter and until the pyloric sphincter. Note, the stomach is also smooth muscle tissue and does conduct peristalsis. The pyloric sphincter, just like the lower esophageal sphincter, prevents food from entering the small intestines too early. The function of the stomach is digestion. It conducts digestion in two methods: mechanical through peristalsis and chemical through pepsin, which is an enzyme that digests proteins, and hydrochloric acid, which is produced by the parietal cells that also breaks down our food in our stomach. Acid is released from the parietal cells due to acetylcholine, gastrin, and histamine, which interacts with the histamine 2 receptor. Since the stomach is constantly surrounded by acid, the stomach needs some form of protection. The protection comes in this form of mucus layer. The mucus layer is created or released by prostaglandins, a cytoprotective factor. Prostaglandin is affected by certain drugs, especially NSAIDs and steroids. They block prostaglandin production. The stomach also secretes intrinsic factor, which is needed for the absorption of vitamin B12. The lack of intrinsic factor leads to pernicious anemia, or an anemia due to vitamin B12 deficiency. To treat pernicious anemia, we can give cyanocobalamin, which is vitamin B12 injections, subcutaneously. We cannot give vitamin B12 orally because we cannot absorb vitamin B12 due to the lack of intrinsic factor. Once the food has been digested in the stomach, we end up with chyme, or a very liquid-like substance which contains predigested food and our stomach secretions. The stomach will empty into the first part of the small intestine, which is the duodenum. Stomach emptying is influenced or affected by food quantity, exercise, and strong emotions. Also connected to this first part of the small intestine, we see that the pancreas and also the liver, which produces bile, it empties into the small intestine and contributes to digestion. The pancreas, which is located below the stomach in this diagram, contributes the pancreatic juice, which contains amylases, lipases, and proteases. The cartoon below depicts how lipases digest fats. If the fat globules are too large, the lipases are ineffective at digesting these globules. Therefore, bile helps emulsify these fats or break down these larger globules into smaller globules. Bile is released in response to cholecystokinin, or a hormone that is secreted by the small intestine when there is a high-fat meal entering the small intestine. After the stomach, we enter the small intestines. Our root term here is entero. Notice again that we see that the small intestine is made up of smooth muscle tissue. Again, that indicates that we will see peristalsis. The small intestine is broken up into three parts. The first part is the duodenum. The next part is the jejunum. The third part is the ileum, which connects to the large intestine. The function of the small intestine is for absorption, and how the small intestine absorbs nutrients is through these villi. The villi are microscopic projections that protrude from the small intestinal wall. They increase the surface area, which allows for further contact with the nutrients, allowing greater absorption. This image depicts a cross-section of a villi or villus. Note that there is only a one-cell difference or barrier between the intestinal lumen and the bloodstream, which allows for greater absorption. The next part of the GI system is the large intestines. Our root word here is colo, aka the colon or bowel. Again, you see that this is also composed of smooth muscle tissue, and therefore we will see peristalsis. There are the different parts of the large intestines that we had discussed in our previous diagram at the beginning of the lecture. Here we see another cartoon of the large intestine. Note the different parts of the large intestine, starting with the ascending colon, the transverse colon, the descending colon, the sigmoid colon, connecting to the rectum, and then to the anus. The large intestine has two functions. Number one, to reabsorb water, and number two, to eliminate our fibrous waste through the rectum and out the anus. Note the root term here, procto, for rectum. Note, if we have too fast of motility in the large intestine, we will see a decrease in water reabsorption, which in turn leads to increased water in the stool, which will lead to diarrhea. If we have too slow of motility, we would have an increased amount of water reabsorption, which would mean a decreased amount of water in the stool, which would lead to dry or hard stool or constipation. Next is the peritoneum. This is not technically part of the GI tract, but is a double-folded membrane that protects our GI tract. We see the term here, ascites, which is a disorder that is seen with the peritoneum. This is a collection of fluid in the peritoneal cavity. A treatment for this is paracentesis, or an actual puncture into the peritoneal cavity to remove that fluid. Now we will discuss some diseases and the symptoms of the GI tract. First, we will talk about the mouth. There is a term called thrush, which is a fungal infection of the mouth, and it is caused by a species of fungus called Candida. This leaves a white appearance in the mouth and can be treated with antifungal therapy, such as nystatin, pastilles, or troches. There is also a suspension of the nystatin, and you would recommend doing swish and swallow. There is also a popsicle form ideally for children. The next term is leukoplakia, or smoker's patch. This is a white flaky plaque in the mouth and is considered precancerous. Our last term on the page is xerostomia, which is a condition of dry mouth and can be seen in patients after radiation or chemo, or it can be iatrogenic, which can be seen with. Next is the condition of cleft palate. Note the child on the left with the split palate and the same child on the right after they had palatoplasty or reconstruction of the palate. They also had done a chyloplasty or reconstruction of the lip. Next, we see the pharynx, or the throat. We see the term pharyngitis, which is inflammation of the throat. Pharyngeal edema is also swelling of the throat. We see in the esophagus, we see dysphagia, which is difficulty swallowing. We see atresia, which is no opening. We see varices, which is a type of varicose veins. And we see hiatal hernia. Here is an image depicting varices. In this particular case, esophageal varices. The varicose veins in the esophagus are due to increased portal pressure or pressure in the liver. This image depicts the correction of these varices through the process of an endoscope. This is an image of a hiatal hernia. A hiatal hernia is when the stomach protrudes through the diaphragm into the esophagus. This leads to possible acid reflux, which we will be discussing later on in lecture. Our last condition is atresia. This image depicts the incomplete formation of the esophagus, leading to no connection of the mouth to the stomach. In patients with atresia, they need to be fed not orally, but through an IV or G tube. A G tube is a tube placed directly into the stomach. To correct the atresia, anastomosis is needed, or the reconstruction or reconnecting of the two openings. This concludes our lecture for today. Thank you.